The same judge that struck down the law also struck down one in Georgia, one here in California in Escondido, and one in Farmers Branch. I guess that's Texas. Anyway, it goes on and on. It talks about Oklahoma. There's been a lot of places that have tried to make anti-immigrant ordinances locally. It's just not a good idea. I mean, basically, the courts have been primarily finding that they're unconstitutional. And it really should not be a state or local issue. It really shouldn't. Now, I think that I understand in a way why this is going on, because it's very frustrating that people feel that the federal government is not doing what they're supposed to do. And a lot of people think that it's costing the state money. And in a way, yes, it does cost the state money. I mean, Bob Keller and this Gittelson guy, they were talking about, well, it costs $100 million for this and $200 for... It added up to like $1 billion or whatever it is in the state of California. And it's true. There are costs associated with illegal immigration. But the problem is they only talk about the costs. They don't look at both sides of the balance sheet. You know, when you look at a balance sheet, there's debits and credits. And they always love to talk about the debits, about how it's costing us a lot of money. But if you just leave it at that, if you let that hang out there, oh, they're costing us $100 million or whatever it is, it's very disingenuous. You're only talking about the fact that it costs you money, like it costs Toyota $15,000 to build a car. But if they sell the car for $25,000, then it's a whole different story. There's actually a profit. Same thing is true with immigration. A lot of them pay taxes, but that's not even really the issue to me. Because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. 85%, by the way, of all the eminent economists in this country say that illegal immigrants actually pay more in total taxes than they cost in social services. And that's a fact. Well, 74% say more, 11% say the same, and 15% say, no, they probably cost us a little bit more. But that's, you know, you're just talking about, you know, a little difference. Who cares about if they cost a little more or they pay a little more? Because what they contribute to the economy, if you look at it from a macroeconomic effect of the whole economy, they contribute a lot more than that. Like, I come from the apparel industry. I know a lot of people that have factories. I used to be one of the biggest manufacturers in the state. I'm semi-retired. I don't really do that, and I haven't for over a decade. I just want to say that in case you say, oh, he's just looking to get sweatshop labor. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But I know a lot of people that are still in the business, and even when I was in the business, I know what was going on. And look, there are 12 million people that are here without documents, and they're all working somewhere. And I know that in the apparel industry, probably about half of all the people that we employed in that industry were probably undocumented. We didn't know for sure. They had driver's licenses, they had social security cards. That's really the end of what we were legally supposed to do. We're supposed to look, and as long as they have documentation, we're not allowed to really at that time question it. There was no E-Verify or anything like that. But typically,
the lobbyists pay for those laws.
Yeah. All right, just let me finish this. So let's say that half of the employees in a company that work in their production facility don't have documents. Like, typically, I'm thinking of a friend of mine that went through something. He had about 120 employees, and he got a call. It turned out to be like a prank call, but he got a call from somebody that said they were with the INS and they were going to come audit his books to see who was there illegally. Well, he had documentation for everybody, but he knew at the end of the day that probably, push come to shove, half the people were probably there, you know, without documents. All right. There's two ways to look at it. You could say, well, you know, don't be greedy, get rid of all the undocumented people, and you'll still have half the business. But it doesn't really work that way in the real world, because what happens is that this guy that was, you know, his customers were expecting a certain delivery schedule, a certain quality schedule at a certain price, and that was based on the fact that he had 120 employees operating 9 machines and blah, blah, blah. Well, if he were to get rid of half of his force, he would still have all those same customers because his whole cost structure would be different. Everything about his business would be a little bit different, and he wouldn't be able to have half his business. Maybe he'd have a third of the business, whatever it is. But the point is that, let's say those 60 undocumented workers were in a very real way supporting the other 60 legal workers in that business. So you have to look at it and say, well, if we didn't have these 60 illegal workers, then the other 60 may or may not have a job, but even if they did, they wouldn't have been made the same amount of money. I know for a fact that the owner who pays $500,000 a year in taxes would not have been able to make as much money had he only had his 60 legal workers. So then you say, well, why don't you get rid of them? Now, it's a little bit different now. You know, now unemployment's high. It would probably be a little bit easier to get skilled workers. Not real easy, though. But at the time, and I was in the middle of it watching the situation, he couldn't find legal workers. This is only a year and a half ago, by the way, that there was full employment in this country. It's not like, you know, this recession's been around for a long time, and it's not like it's going to stay around for a long time because, you know, immigration laws generally last on the books 25 to 30 years. We did a big immigration law in the 50s. We did it again in 1986, and now it's time. We have to do another one. But just to go back to what I was saying, if you look at the fact that a lot of the workers in this guy's factory owed a certain percentage of their salary to the fact that they were undocumented workers working in that factory, then a lot of the taxes that the legal people paid were because of the fact that that company employed undocumented people. If you go to a big grocery chain like you know, Ralph's or whatever, you realize that most of the food that they're selling in there, one way or another, were processed by undocumented workers. So it's disingenuous to just say, well, how much tax did they pay and how much did they cost us in social services? Because that's not really the correct way to look at it. The real way to look at it is, on the whole economy, what would be the difference between if we had them here and we didn't?
We're going to need a couple questions.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. All right. Well, that's basically it. Did anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You said that the Saver State was categorized as a hate group, and I can't remember by whom. You said
Southern
that.
Poverty Law Center.
Okay, thank you.
But, yeah, and you know what? I talked to the Southern Poverty Law Center about this Bob Keller issue. Because I know them and we've worked together on some different things. And, I mean, they didn't want to get legally involved because they didn't want to, it wasn't where they wanted to go. But they basically condemned it in no uncertain language and said that it was a despicable situation. Yeah.
I was just wondering, you didn't quite finish the argument in terms of if they did pass the immigration reform, how the macroeconomic would change, because the people would be legal then. So
Right. Well, basically, this study. Okay. Well,
Okay, go ahead.
repeat your question.
I just said that you need to explain how the macroeconomics would change if the legalization went through, because basically you said that the illegal status was supporting the macroeconomic situation.
all right. Well, okay. To look at the economic model, for example, that these two professors did, one for UCLA and one for USC, what they were basically saying is that right now the prospects for the workers that are undocumented are very limited. They're sort of beggars, not choosers in terms of employment. And by the way, the employment rate among undocumented workers is much higher than 10% or 12% or whatever the regular unemployment rate is in the state of California. It's quite a bit higher. And the underemployment rate is additionally quite a bit higher. But basically what this study looked at was that if they were documented, they could eventually work their way up to better jobs. They would certainly be able to not be, they wouldn't have to settle for less money than their coworkers. And that's where the $1.5 trillion over 10 years pretty much came from, is the difference between if someone was legalized and had all the opportunities that a legal person would have to pursue further education and whatever over the course of time, versus people that were stuck in the shadows and just sort of had to settle for whatever the employers wanted to pay them. And by the way, that's a two-way street, because a lot of times you hear construction workers or whatever complaining, well, they have to compete against undocumented immigrants, and that they have a point. And if we were to legalize these people, that would take that whole issue away, and you wouldn't have unfair competition.